Well, thank you very much for joining me for this talk. My name is Peter Lowen. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto, and I'm the Associate Director at the Schwartz Reisman Institute. Along with our director, Gillian Hadfield, I'm very pleased to organize this series on artificial intelligence and government. It's a particularly exciting topic, I think, because artificial intelligence and machine learning hold out so much promise for governments. It's an important topic because with that promise comes deep, vexing risks. Manageable ones, to be sure, but risks nonetheless. What I wish to achieve in this short talk is to give you a framework to think about how artificial intelligence and machine learning might change government, how we might think about the risks involved in that, and how we might think about where we can most effectively deploy artificial intelligence. And not only because it will make government more efficient or cost effective, but because it might make government and the public services that support governments better. Before I do that, though, I'd like to ask you to reflect on the work that you do. And I'm actually going to give you a little bit of an assignment as you watch this video. What I want you to do is to think about the work that you do every day. Of course, with hundreds of thousands of public servants, the diversity of tasks that you engage in, the fields in which those tasks are situated, and your place within the larger bureaucracy is remarkably varied. I can't begin to imagine all of it. But despite that, I think there are some common elements to the tasks you all engage in, and asking questions about those tasks can help motivate our understanding of how artificial intelligence and machine learning might be employed in government. So here are the questions. Number 1, can you manage the number of decisions you have to make each day, or do you feel overwhelmed by this? Number 2, do you understand the reasons you are asked to take the decisions you are making? Number 3, do you understand how to make these decisions in a fashion that is fair and in keeping with the ethics of public service? Do you understand how the decisions you make are consistent with larger democratic values? And fourth, do you learn from the decisions you take, or do you simply move on to the next set of decisions, unsure if you're advising on the right course of action? If you're not sure about these things yourself, imagine 3 different people who are taking decisions. One might be a frontline worker figuring out eligibility for employment insurance for someone whose file has been put under review. How many decisions like this are they making in a day? One might be someone determining the suitability of some applications for residency or immigration over other applications. How do they know the exact criteria they should be choosing on when they know these applicants and where they are coming from imperfectly? Or imagine someone working as a director in the Ministry of Finance seeking to understand whether new tax rules will lead to net increases in revenues. How can they be more certain that there won't be other changes in the behavior of citizens or in the responses of other states, which might make their revenue forecasts incorrect? These are all the kinds of thorny problems that governments face, and for which AI and machine learning hold out a lot of promise. My hope in having you reflect on the kinds of decisions which you make in your own day-to-day work is that you might land on some of the fundamental challenges that governments face when making decisions. There are many, of course, but I want to focus on 4 in this talk. I think these challenges share important characteristics. They're straightforward and maybe they're even self-evident. On their own, they're troublesome, but taken together, when you add all of them up, they're much more vexing. And they're challenges not only for individuals, but for all of government. So what are these challenges? First, people in government are asked to make a large number of decisions. Second, decisions are to be made in a way that's consistent with policy goals and objectives. Third, decisions, especially those that have bearing on the public, and most especially those that have bearing on individuals, should be made in a way that is procedurally fair and consistent with democratic norms. Fourth, we should learn from the decisions that we make. Now, I'm not sure that all of you listening to this will face all of these challenges. It might be that you recognize just 1 or 2 of them, but I assure you that all of these challenges are faced by your department, and certainly all are faced by the government writ large. These challenges then are collective, and they are organizational. Let me expand on each of these challenges just a little bit more. First, people in government are asked to make a large number of decisions. As the old saying goes, to govern is to choose. Now, this is typically meant to capture the idea that politicians have to make choices, big choices, between different policy options. But it's also true, I think, in a very important sense about the work that you do as public servants. Every drafted policy memo, which ends with a recommendation, or 3 recommendations, for policy action is suggesting some course of action. It is, in other words, encouraging one decision over others. Every time an EI case is reviewed, a decision is being made. Now, sometimes that decision will be deterministic, a set of rules will be applied, and there will be no human judgment applied, but a decision has nonetheless been made. This person worked some number of weeks and therefore they qualify. But those rules were themselves a kind of decision. Every time a policy official in finance settles on a course of action for a tax rule change to bring to their minister, and that measure is put into a budget and then realized in legislation, a decision has been made. Of course, these are just a few examples, but it remains true that millions of decisions are made by the Government of Canada each year. Second, decisions are to be made in a way that is consistent with policy goals and objectives. Government cannot, or at least should not, make decisions arbitrarily. Instead, decisions should be made consistent with some set of policies that have been articulated to guide that decision-making. Sometimes these policy guidelines will have objectives articulated along with them. Let me give you an example, which I hope will make this distinction clear. Suppose we're interested in how EI cases are determined, in particular where there are cases with unclear information about the circumstances under which an individual left their role, whether they left voluntarily, whether they were fired with cause, whether they were laid off. With a well-developed policy, there will be a detailed set of guidelines or decision rules, there they are again, decisions, which will help an agent work through whether the individual qualifies for EI. But beyond those rules, there may be objectives or principles which are guiding the decision. For example, the reason for denying EI when individuals voluntarily leave a job might be that we want to discourage people from leaving gainful employment and making recourse to EI when they could otherwise continue working. In this case, we want to avoid a certain moral hazard because it strains the program. But maybe there's a different reason or objective. Maybe the rule is there to encourage people to work for some other moral or normative reason. Why does it matter? Well, knowing why a rule is there, understanding the values on which the rule is based and the objectives which it's trying to meet, may help the decision maker understand if their decisions are consistent, not only with sometimes fuzzy rules, but also with the overall goals of a program. Reasons matter, not just decisions. Third, how we make decisions in government matters, which is to say process matters. Decisions, especially those that have bearing on the public, and most especially those that have bearing on individuals, should be made in a way that's procedurally fair and consistent with democratic norms. A challenge for government is not only that a very large number of decisions need to be made, but the way they need to be made has to be consistent with what people think is fair and democratic. I understand that this may sound fuzzy, but let me give you an example. Suppose you're in a rush to park your car one morning, dropping off your child or your grandchild at a new summer camp program. You hurriedly park your car after quickly checking the parking sign, which said 10-minute drop-offs were permitted. After running your child inside, you come back to your car to find a ticket on it. It turns out you're not allowed to make drop-offs at that place on Monday mornings, as this is when the street sweeper drives by to clean the curb lane. You've been fined $100. There is, it also turns out, a sign there saying this, but it's partially obstructed by trees, and you couldn't easily see it. In any ways, you're only in for a bit, and the street sweeper didn't come. In most cases like this, you can appeal the decision. So suppose you do go to appeal the decision, and you get 2 minutes in front of some city clerk or a justice of the peace. As you go to explain your predicament, the clerk does not appear to be listening carefully. Perhaps he's looking at his phone. Or imagine he doesn't look at you at all. Instead, he just stares out the window. How would you feel about this? Would you feel like your case was being heard well? I think many of us would say no. We would feel disrespected, unheard, unfairly treated. Indeed, we may even infer from this that the clerk was going to deny us our case. Now imagine that the clerk, having paid little attention, says, "I've decided to quash your ticket, goodbye." Would you feel good? Well, probably, after all, you've just saved $100. But you would not, I reckon, feel perfectly fine, because you would have some sense that the decision was not taken in the right way, whatever the outcome. The way you were treated was not consistent with the levels of respect you might expect from that institution, or the level of fairness and seriousness. Humans have deep senses not only of what outcomes they prefer, but how those outcomes should be arrived at. This, I hope, does a little bit to illustrate one of the challenges of decision-making in government. The public cares not only about what decisions are made, but how decisions are made. Can we go back to the example for just one more minute? Suppose you decided to hang around in that courtroom for a bit longer to see what other kinds of decisions were being made by this clerk. Suppose it's someone who looked just like you entered. Lo and behold, they had received the same ticket a week earlier. Imagine further that the judge treated them just as he treated you, with the same kind of distracted indifference. How would you feel if you then saw that the individual did not have their ticket quashed? Instead, they were put on the hook for the $100. Would you be bothered by not only the decorum of the clerk, but also his inconsistency, even if you got the better end of that inconsistency? Of course you would. So the challenge then is not only that decisions are procedurally well executed, but also that they are consistent. Fourth, we should learn from the decisions that we make. This may seem self-evident, obvious, even daft, but it is important and true. And what does it take to learn from the decisions that we make? Well, one rough and ready understanding would be that we evaluate how, and maybe why, we expect the decision to turn out. We then observe how the decision worked out. We then update our beliefs about that course of action, and maybe related courses of action. Easier said than done, however. There are several challenges to this. First, we have to have data on how our decision turned out. Those data may not always be available to us. Second, and this problem is the one that social scientists call the fundamental challenge of causal inference, or the fundamental challenge of separating cause from correlation, we have to know what outcome would have resulted if we had made a different decision. Third, we have to have the time to look at the data. Fourth, we have to figure out what beliefs or what models of the world motivated the decision in the first place. And then we have to update those. Learning is not impossible, but it's very, very hard. Now, this is not to say that good decisions can't be made. Of course they can, and they regularly are. But could they be made better? And what promise might AI and machine learning offer for better decision making? So let's talk about the promise of AI and machine learning. Artificial intelligence and machine learning have the potential for major advances on all of these challenges. What I wish to do is not only or principally to give you examples of how AI and machine learning can solve these challenges. We'll do that in other talks and in our discussions. But to introduce you to the logic of how these technologies can improve decision making. First, AI and machine learning can help us automate decisions. They might do this by developing a series of decision rules or prediction rules. When given certain data inputs, they'll make a decision. For example, we might develop a model of what factors lead to a small business successfully paying a loan. If these factors can be measured, then they can be added into a model, which can decide which small business should receive a government loan. Or we might rely on a series of algorithms to make recommendations and leave the final decision to the decision maker, aided by AI and by machine learning. Now, this kind of example might sound obvious. Don't we already rely on decision rules? After all, small businesses do apply for loans now, and when they do so, they do submit data about their revenues, their business plans, their credit scores. So what's new here? Well, there are three things. First, by automating the consideration of these factors, we could potentially increase the speed of decision making. Machines, after all, do not get tired, and they have substantially more computational power, though sometimes with less complexity, than humans. Second, as important as speed is the consistency of decisions made by machines. Under certain parameters, given the same data, a machine will always make the same decisions. We can't actually say the same thing about humans, as we're constantly beset by small changes in our environment, or in our mood, or otherwise irrelevant factors, or features of a decision, which change the decision that we make. Sometimes these irrelevant factors will involve things like bias or prejudice, which have the potential to do great harm. Other times it might be something as arbitrary as weather or food affecting our mood. In between these are all manner of things that might make us make one decision one day and another decision the next, with no change in the facts, with no change in the inputs. So one of the promises of automated decision making is the potential to bring to bear data and other information that are chosen because of their consistency with policy goals. At the same time, we can eliminate the influence of irrelevant and potentially biased or biasing sources of information. Third, automated decision making can incorporate a much larger store of information into any decision. Indeed, one of the great promises of data-driven automated decision making is that it can consider a massive volume of data from past decisions. It can match up outcomes from decisions where different paths were taken, and then understand if path A and path B in fact led to different outcomes. And it can constantly improve on its predictions. It can, in a word, learn. And it can do so at a rate much faster than humans. If the public service faces fundamental challenges in its decision-making, AI and machine learning hold out solutions to at least some of these fundamental challenges. It does not do so without risk, however. So what then are the major risks of employing AI and machine learning in government decision-making? There are, by my lights at least, 3 major risks of relying more on automated decision-making. And it's important that we're clear-eyed about these because they have to be front of mind for us if we want to effectively implement automated decision-making. And by ignoring them, we invite citizens' objections to governments using algorithms. This is something we talk about much more in a future session. First, there's the problem of biased data inputs. Let me give you an example. Suppose people are divided into 2 groups, Group A and Group B. People in both groups are applying for small business loans. People in these groups are otherwise the same in their talents and their abilities and their likelihood of success. But people in Group B are subject to discrimination in the real world, such that when real humans evaluated their potential, they would generally assign to them lower scores. What would happen then if we use the decisions made by humans to train or to inform our machines or algorithms to make these decisions on our behalf? The machines will, with some likelihood, learn our biases and make equally bad predictions. This is a problem of biased data inputs. Now, this is just a specific instance of a general problem. Problems of poor data, especially if the quality of data varies by group or region or some other factor, will lead to worse predictions for some groups than others. What we put into our models will affect what comes out of our models. Second, there's the problem of explainability. Why does a machine make the decisions which it makes? Now, you might not think understanding the reasons that a machine makes the decisions that it has matters. After all, we count on any number of machines to function or serve some purpose, and we don't care much about how they get there. Who really knows how an air conditioner works, for example? But think back to the example of the parking ticket. Now imagine yourself, instead of being in front of a judge, being in front of a machine that's considering your case. Do you feel better that a machine is considering the particularities of your case? Well, in public matters, reasons matter, because they tell us important things about the kinds of decisions an actor will make in other situations, and they tell us a lot about whether we can trust that actor in the future. Reasons matter and explanations matter because they help us trust decision makers. So, the individual who is rejected for a small business loan may not like the decision, but they will feel much better with it if they can, for example, understand what they would need to change to be successful in the future, or if they understood what factors were brought to bear in good faith by the decision maker. Finally and relatedly, there are problems of consent and procedural unfairness. Emerging research is very clear on this matter. Citizens are more likely to accept a decision when they know that there has been a human in the loop, at least somewhere. They need to feel heard by another human being, to believe that their unique factors were included in a decision. We can't do this for everything, but we should think about how AI machine learning systems can still allow humans, public servants, to bring their judgments to bear, to explain how decisions were made, and to demonstrate that these decisions were aided rather than impeded by artificial intelligence and machine learning. We look forward to talking about this more.